things you say every single day that are doing damage you don't even realize. They sound innocent. They feel like simple statements of fact. You have been saying them so long you don't even hear them anymore. But every single time they come out of your mouth, they're shaping who you are becoming. Shaping what you believe about yourself. Shaping the kind of life you are walking into. And not in the direction you'd want if you stopped to think about it. Here's the truth. The words you speak about yourself, about your life, about other people, they are not neutral. They are not just describing reality, they are creating it. The brain you carry around in your head has been listening to your voice your entire life, and it has been taking notes. Every I can't, every I'm not, every I always. The brain catalogs these statements and builds your identity around them. So if you have been saying the same limiting things for 30 years, you are the person who lives inside those statements. You built that prison with your own voice. Today, I want to talk about 10 things you have to stop saying out loud, not in your head, though that's also important, but out loud, where the brain hears them most clearly, where they get the most reinforcement, where they do the most damage. These are common phrases. You probably say several of them, maybe most of them. You might say one of them every day without thinking, and each one is quietly limiting what you become. Stop saying them and watch what changes. Not because the words are magic, they aren't, but because the absence of those words leaves room for different words. And different words over time build a different person. Now, before we get into the list, you have to understand why this matters. Because most people don't believe that the way they talk about themselves actually shapes them. They think their words are just a description of reality, not a creator of it. So they say negative things about themselves freely, thinking they're being honest, thinking they're being self-aware. And they don't connect any of it to why their life looks the way it does. Listen, you cannot keep declaring limitations every day and expect your life to look like you don't have them. The brain doesn't work that way. You see, the brain is built to look for evidence that confirms whatever you tell it is true. If you tell it you're not good with money, every time you make a financial decision, it will help you make a bad one to confirm the story. If you tell it you don't have discipline, every time you face a hard choice, it will help you take the easy way out to confirm the story. The brain is loyal to the story you give it. Loyalty isn't always a good thing. And here's what most people don't realize. The stories you tell yourself out loud are the stickiest. Saying something to yourself in your head is one thing. Saying it out loud, where you hear your own voice declaring it, is another. The brain treats the spoken version as a stronger signal, as a kind of commitment, as something you're publicly agreeing to be. And once you've publicly agreed to be something in front of yourself and other people, the cost of contradicting that becomes higher. So you keep saying it and keep being it. So if you have been saying things about yourself out loud to friends, to family, to coworkers for years, those statements have done more damage than anything you have thought silently. Because every time you said them, you were reinforcing them, cementing them, making them harder to overcome. The good news is the same mechanism works in reverse. The moment you stop saying the limiting things out loud, the brain has less evidence for the story it has been telling about you. The story starts to weaken. Other possibilities open up. You're not going to be a different person tomorrow because you stopped saying, I'm not good with money. But you also won't be the same person in 5 years. And the version of you in 5 years who has stopped speaking those limitations into existence, that person has options the current version of you doesn't have. You must take this seriously. Every single day, the words you speak about yourself are voting for who you'll become. Cut these from your speech forever, starting now. Number 1, you must stop saying, "I'm not good with money." That statement is one of the most damaging things you can declare about yourself. And most people say it like it's just a quirk, like they're admitting to a small weakness. They're not. They're locking themselves into a financial identity that will follow them for the rest of their life. Here's the truth. Money is a skill, not a talent, not a gift. A skill, like driving, like cooking, like reading. And anybody who is alive can learn a skill if they spend any meaningful time trying. The person who says, "I'm not good with money," is not actually telling you the truth about their abilities. They're telling you the truth about how much time they've spent learning the skill. The answer is very little. When you say, "I'm not good with money," your brain hears, "This is who I am. This is fixed. There's no point in trying." And the brain, being loyal, helps you avoid every situation where you might have to develop the skill. You don't read the book. You don't track your spending. You don't learn about investing. You don't ask the questions you should be asking. Because to do any of that would contradict the identity you've declared. So you stay where you are, bad with money, because you have been protecting that identity for years without realizing it. You see, the people who are good with money were not born good with money. They were born exactly the same as you. They got curious, they paid attention, they asked questions, they tracked their spending for 1 month. They read 1 book, they made 1 investment. They learned in small pieces over time the skill that you have been declaring you don't have. Drop the phrase permanently, even if it feels true right now. Even if you have a long history of financial mistakes, even if you can list 10 ways you have messed up with money, none of that is who you are. All of it is who you have been. And who you have been doesn't have to be who you become. The first step in becoming somebody who is good with money is to stop declaring every chance you get that you are not. Next, stop saying, "I don't have time," because what you're actually saying and what your brain is hearing is, it's not a priority, but it sounds like a fact when you frame it as time. And the framing tricks you into believing you're the victim of your schedule, instead of recognizing you're the architect of it. You must reckon with the fact that you cannot keep blaming time for what is actually a choice. Here's the truth. You have the same 24 hours every other person has. The CEO has them. The parent of 3 has them. The student has them. The retiree has them. What separates the people who get things done from the people who don't is not the amount of time available. It is what they have decided to do with that time. And every "I don't have time" is a decision you have made about what matters, dressed up to look like a constraint imposed by reality. When you say, "I don't have time to exercise," what you mean is, I don't choose to make exercise a priority over the other things I do with my hours. I don't have time to read usually means I have time, but I'm spending it on things I consider more important than reading. You see, every one of those statements is true. You are making the choice. You just don't want to own it. So you frame it as a time problem instead of a values problem. And the framing protects you from having to look at what you're actually prioritizing. Drop the phrase. The next time you're about to say, I don't have time, replace it with the actual truth. I haven't made that a priority. I'm spending my time on other things. I haven't chosen to do that. You will hate how it sounds. That's the point. The discomfort is the truth catching up to you. And once you start saying what you actually mean, you can start deciding whether your priorities are really the ones you want, or whether you're spending your hours on things that don't matter, while telling yourself you don't have time for the things that do. Next, you got to stop saying, I could never do that. This phrase comes out most often when somebody mentions an accomplishment, a career change, a skill, a big move, and you respond by separating yourself from the possibility. You say it like a compliment sometimes. Wow, I could never do that. But what your brain hears is, that is not available to me. And the brain files the option away, marks it closed, and stops thinking about it. But here's the truth. You don't know what you could never do. Nobody does. You cannot judge an ability you have never tested. The things you have never tried are, by definition, things you don't have evidence about. The could never is not coming from data. It's coming from fear, or from comparison, or from a story you've been telling yourself about what kinds of people do what kinds of things. You see, the person who actually did the thing, the person who started the business, learned the language, ran the marathon, wrote the book, was not born different from you. They were not given some special quality you weren't given. They were the same kind of human being with the same kind of doubts. The difference is they didn't say, I could never do that. They said, I wonder how I would do that. And then they started badly and figured it out as they went. The phrase, I could never, closes the door before you've walked up to it. It removes the option from your future. And once it's removed, you don't see it anymore. You don't even consider it. 5 years go by. 10 years. And the thing you could never do is still on the other side of a door you closed without ever opening it. Drop the phrase. Replace it with curiosity. The next time you hear about somebody doing something impressive, instead of saying, I could never do that, try saying, I wonder how they did that. Or, what would it take for me to do something like that? Those questions keep the door open. They invite the possibility back into your life. And one of those possibilities eventually might be the thing you were never going to do until you stop saying you couldn't. Next, you have to stop saying, that's just who I am. Because that phrase is the most polite way ever invented for refusing to grow. It sounds like self-acceptance, but it's not. Self-acceptance acknowledges who you are without committing to staying there. That's just who I am, commits to staying there. It draws a circle around the worst version of you and says, this is the maximum I will become. Do not ask me to move past this. Here's the truth. You don't have a fixed nature. The you who exists at 30 is not the you who existed at 20, and it is not the you who will exist at 50. The human being is plastic. The personality, the habits, the patterns, all of it changes all the time in response to what you do and what you tell yourself about yourself. When you say, I'm just a procrastinator, that's who I am, you are not describing a fact. You are choosing to stay a procrastinator. When you say, I'm just bad with people, that's who I am, you are choosing to stay bad with people. The just who I am framing is not honest. It is a defense mechanism. It protects you from the discomfort of having to change. And you must understand that the discomfort is the actual price of growing. Everybody who has ever grown into a better version of themselves paid that price. You see, the people you most respect, the ones who have built admirable lives, are not the people who said, "This is just who I am." They are the people who said, at some point, "This is who I am right now, but it isn't who I have to be." That distinction is the difference between somebody who grows and somebody who doesn't. Drop the phrase. The next time you're tempted to defend a flaw by saying, "That's just who I am," catch yourself. Replace it with, "That's how I've been operating, and I'm working on changing it." Even if you're not actually working on changing it yet. The new phrase opens the possibility. The old one closes it. Over time, the phrase you use will shape the actions you take. And the actions you take will eventually change the person you actually are, despite what you used to tell yourself. Next, drop, "I'll start tomorrow," or Monday, or the first of the month, or next year. The specific delay doesn't matter. What matters is the pattern. You are putting off the thing you say you want to start, and you are using a future date as cover for not starting now. Here's the truth. The future date you've picked is not real. It is a fiction your mind has invented to give itself permission to keep doing what it's already doing. When Monday comes, you will pick a new Monday. When January arrives, you will pick a new January. The pattern doesn't fix itself when the calendar turns. The calendar turning is just another opportunity to pick a new delay. You see, the only day you can actually start anything is today. Tomorrow doesn't exist yet. When tomorrow arrives, it will be today, and today will be the only day you can start. So if you can't start today, you won't be able to start tomorrow either. You must accept this. The same internal resistance that's blocking you now will be there then, dressed in slightly different clothes. The people who actually accomplish things have a different relationship with starting. They don't pick perfect days. They don't wait for Mondays. They start badly in the middle of a Wednesday, in their existing clothes, with whatever resources are available right now. They don't promise themselves they'll start tomorrow. They start now, because they have learned that the gap between I will and I am gets crossed only by doing, not by scheduling. Drop the phrase. The next time you catch yourself about to say, "I'll start tomorrow," ask yourself what you can do in the next hour to start today. Not the whole thing, just one small piece of it. The first walk, the first sentence, the first phone call, the first dollar saved, the first push-up. Whatever it is, do it now, today. Then do it again tomorrow, and so on. The starting was never the problem. The not starting dressed up as, "I'll start tomorrow," was always the problem. Next, you got to stop saying, "I'm too old for that," or "I'm too young," or any version of "age is the reason I can't," because age is almost never the actual obstacle. It's the excuse you use when the actual obstacle, fear, effort, uncertainty, feels too uncomfortable to name. Here's the truth. People start things at every age. There are people who started their most important work in their 20s. There are people who started it in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. There are people who learned new languages in their 70s. People who started businesses in their 80s. People who ran marathons in their 90s. The age at which you start has very little to do with what you can do. What matters is whether you start and whether you keep going. The person who started at 55 and worked at it for 20 years is going to have 20 years of compounded effort by the time they're 75. That's enough time to do almost anything. But the person who said, I'm too old to start at 55, has 0 years of effort by the time they're 75. They have the same number of years, but a very different position. You see, I'm too old is not really about age. It's about not wanting to be a beginner again. Adults hate being beginners. We hate the awkwardness, the incompetence, the visible struggle of learning something new. So we use age as cover. We pretend the calendar is what's stopping us, when really it's the discomfort of starting from scratch. You cannot keep blaming the calendar for what is really fear of being a beginner. Drop the phrase. The next time you're tempted to write something off because of your age, ask yourself a different question. Not, am I too old for this? But how many years would I have to put in to be good at this? And how many years am I actually planning to live? The answer for almost any pursuit is you have time, more time than you think. Definitely more time than the version of you saying, I'm too old wants to admit. The calendar is not the obstacle. The story you're telling about the calendar is next. You must stop saying they got lucky, about the person who built the business, about the person who lost the weight, about the person who got the promotion, about the person who wrote the book that hit. Every time you explain somebody else's success by calling it luck, you are doing two things. You are diminishing their effort, and you are protecting yourself from learning what they actually did. I once knew a man who, every time he saw somebody successful, would say to himself, they got lucky. He had been saying it for 30 years. Every successful business owner, every author, every athlete, every wealthy person. He had a story about each of them. They were born with money. They knew the right people. They got the lucky break. They were in the right place at the right time. He never doubted his own framework. The framework let him sit comfortably with his own lack of progress. Then one day, he had lunch with a man who had built a business worth $100 million. My friend had always thought of this man as one of the lucky ones. He sat across from him and finally asked straight up how he had gotten so lucky. The man laughed. He didn't laugh meanly. He laughed because he had heard the question 1,000 times from 1,000 people who had assumed the same thing about him. He said, lucky? I worked 60-hour weeks for 15 years before this business produced anything close to what you see now. I borrowed money I almost couldn't repay. I missed my children growing up. I lost my first marriage to the work. I rebuilt the business twice from scratch after it nearly went under. The third version of it finally took off. If that is luck, you can have it. My friend sat there in silence. He realized, sitting at that table, that for 30 years, every single day, every time he had said they got lucky, he had been excusing himself from doing the work. He'd been telling himself a story about other people's success so that he didn't have to feel anything about his own lack of it. Lucky was the framework. The framework was the lie. The lie was what had kept him stuck for 3 decades. He told me years later that the day he stopped saying they got lucky was the day his life began to change. Because the moment he stopped attributing other people's success to luck, he had to start attributing it to something else. And whatever that something else was, he could try to do it himself. He could learn from them. He could study what they did. He could apply it. Here's the truth. Almost nobody gets lucky in the way you've been telling yourself. The people you envy worked harder than you've been willing to admit. They put in years of unseen effort before the visible result. They sacrificed things you haven't sacrificed. And when you call it luck, you are erasing all of that and protecting yourself from having to do any of it. Drop the phrase. The next time you see somebody who has what you want, replace "they got lucky" with "I wonder what they did." That question is the entry point into learning. And learning is the entry point into becoming somebody who has what they have. Next, you have to stop saying it's not fair. Now, sometimes life is genuinely unfair, and acknowledging that is healthy. But it's not fair as a chronic refrain, as a way of explaining your situation, as the lens through which you look at your life. That is poison. Because the more you say it, the more you reinforce the identity of somebody to whom unfair things happen, instead of somebody who responds to whatever happens. Here's the truth. Life isn't fair. It never was. It was never going to be. The fairness framework is a measurement that doesn't fit reality. Some people are born into difficulty. Some people get sick. Some people lose loved ones early. Some people work hard and don't get what they deserve. Some people coast and get more than they deserve. The fairness scale is broken at the level of the universe. It is not coming back. When you say it's not fair, you are demanding that the universe operate by rules it has never operated by. You are insisting on a justice that isn't available. And while you are insisting on it, you are not doing the actual work of building a life inside the reality you're in. The complaint takes the place of the action. You see, the people who build remarkable lives are not the people who got dealt fair hands. They are the people who, regardless of what they were dealt, decided to play the hand. They didn't waste their energy on the fairness conversation. They put their energy into the actual game. And that is why their outcomes look different. Drop the phrase. You must catch this one in real time. The next time something happens that feels unfair and you're about to say it, catch yourself. Replace it with, given that this happened, what's my move now? That question changes everything, because that question respects the reality you're in instead of demanding a reality you don't have. And the move you make from inside reality is the only move that's actually going to work. Next, stop saying I'm just being honest, because 9 times out of 10, when somebody uses that phrase, they are not being honest. They are being harsh or critical or rude and using honesty as cover for it. Real honesty doesn't need a defense. Real honesty doesn't have to label itself. It just speaks. The "I'm just being honest" phrase is what comes out when you said something hurtful and need to justify it. Here's the truth. Honesty without care is just cruelty with a better PR department. The honest thing isn't always the kind thing, but the kind thing isn't always dishonest either. Most situations have a way of telling the truth that doesn't require flattening somebody. And the person who keeps reaching for "I'm just being honest" is usually somebody who hasn't learned how to do that. When you tell somebody their idea is bad, the way you say it matters. When you point out somebody's flaw, the framing matters. When you give feedback, the relationship behind it matters. None of that compromises the honesty. All of it shapes whether the honest thing can actually be received. You see, the people you most respect, the ones whose feedback you actually take to heart, are the people who manage to be honest without being brutal. They tell you the truth in a way you can hear it, and you trust them because of that. The people who say, "I'm just being honest," right after they hurt you, are not the people you go back to for advice. You avoid them. Their honesty isn't getting through. Their cruelty is what's getting through. Drop the phrase. You must learn to tell hard truths without using the phrase as armor. If what you said was honest and kind, You don't need to say, I was just being honest. That's obvious. If what you said wasn't kind, I was just being honest doesn't excuse it. Either way, the phrase has no useful function. Drop it and start learning to tell the truth in ways that the other person can actually receive. That's the harder skill. It is also the one that makes you somebody worth listening to. Next, you must stop saying, I'm fine, when you are not fine. This one might be the hardest on the list, because saying I'm fine feels polite, low friction, harmless. You don't want to burden anybody. You don't want to make a thing of it. So when somebody asks how you are, you say, fine, and you keep walking. You cannot lie to yourself for 30 years without paying for it. And over a lifetime of doing that, something gets broken inside you. Here's the truth. The people who say I'm fine when they're not are the people who eventually crack in private. Because the gap between what they actually feel and what they tell the world keeps widening. And at some point, the gap becomes too much to hold. The crisis you didn't want to have in public ends up being a crisis you have alone, in a much worse form. You see, I'm fine doesn't just deceive the people around you. It deceives the part of yourself that needs to hear the truth in order to respond to it. When you say it out loud, the brain takes that as a signal. Apparently, we're fine. So it doesn't activate the systems that would help you. It doesn't reach out. It doesn't slow down. It doesn't ask for help. Because according to you, fine is what we are. I am telling you, the people who navigate their hard times well are the people who, when something is wrong, say it. Not to everyone, not constantly, but to somebody when the question is asked sincerely. They say, actually, I'm not great today. Or, I'm dealing with something hard. They give themselves permission to name what's happening. And the naming is the beginning of dealing with it. Drop the reflex. The next time somebody asks how you are and you're not fine, try answering honestly. Not dramatically, just truthfully. I've been better, honestly. I'm dealing with something hard. I'm okay, but I've had easier weeks. That kind of honesty connects you to the people in your life in a way I'm fine never can. And it tells your own brain that the situation is real, so the brain can start working on solving it. Instead of pretending to others and to yourself that nothing is going on. So here is what I want you to carry with you. 10 things to stop saying out loud. None of them are dramatic. None of them sound dangerous. All of them have been doing damage for years without your noticing. I'm not good with money. I don't have time. I could never do that. That's just who I am. I'll start tomorrow. I'm too old. They got lucky. It's not fair. I'm just being honest. I'm fine. Every one of those phrases is shaping the person you're becoming. Not because the words are magic, but because the brain catalogs what you say about yourself and builds the life that fits the story. You speak the limitation into being, and then you live inside it. And after 20 years of saying the same things, you become the person who actually is what you've been claiming. I'm telling you, the easiest change you can make to your life starts with what comes out of your mouth. You must take this seriously every single day. You don't have to learn a new skill to drop a phrase. You don't have to do anything heroic. You just have to catch yourself when one of these is about to come out. And stop. Don't say it. Find a better way to phrase it, or say nothing at all. Pick the 3 on this list that you say most often. Just 3. Start with those. Catch yourself every single day when one of them is about to come out. Stop. Replace it with something more accurate, or with silence. Do that for 60 days, and you will notice your inner life has started to shift because the words you stopped speaking out loud no longer have any power to reinforce what they were reinforcing. The version of you in 5 years who has stopped saying these 10 things is going to be living a different life. Not because dropping phrases is magic, but because the absence of those phrases creates room for different beliefs about yourself. And different beliefs, sustained over time, produce different actions. And different actions accumulated produce a different person. Drop the words, watch the rest follow. You must trust that the change is bigger than you think, because most people never make this change. And most people stay exactly where they are.